Hi and welcome to Mentor Monday. I know it's Wednesday, but the question gets asked on a Monday and answered on a Wednesday. This question was about the use of the cue, tuck your tail. A yoga teacher asked me this, and we use the cue, or I've heard the cue used a lot in chair pose, Utkatasana. I've also heard it used in Warrior Two, sometimes in Trikonasana. Should we use it? When should we use it? How should we use it? The first thing you have to ask yourself is why you would ask somebody to tuck their tail. And the second thing you should ask, or simultaneously ask, is should you ask everybody to tuck their tail? If you're using tuck your tail as a general cue for every single person in your class in chair pose, I would suggest you rethink that. And hopefully, as we move on, you might be able to understand why. Why are you asking somebody to tuck their tail? Mostly it's because the teacher feels that the student or students are hyperextended in their lumbar spine. So, normally, when the teacher sees something like this going on, they will ask the student to tuck the tail. So it's an excessive lumbar lordosis, or an excessively large arch in the low back that the teacher sees, and then gives a direct command, which is tuck the tail. Is this correct? We have to ask some more questions. What position should the spine be in for chair pose? If you don't know your students well, if your students have injury, if they're carrying excess weight, if their abdominal muscles are a little bit weaker than they should be, disc issues especially, then neutral spine is optimal for load bearing. So until you know their capabilities, you're better off training people in neutral spine. But, and this is the big but, can you identify what neutral spine is, and are you aware that neutral spine includes an arch in the low back? So in chair pose, there needs to be an arch in the low back. The low back should not be flat. If the low back is flat, it's not neutral, it's actually flexed. So the first thing to identify is, how do you know what neutral spine is? And that's about bony landmarks on the front of your body, but we'll talk about that on another video. Right now, I want you to identify whether there is an arch in the back of your student and whether that arch is excessive, because in chair pose, there is a degree of extension. We don't want to be in neutral. We have to bring the breastbone forwards, whether the feet are together or apart. So there is a degree of extension, and the degree of extension that's in the lumbar spine is dependent on the ability of the person. We do need to be able to extend our lumbar spines to a safe level. How do I identify that? So, should you use the phrase in a general class? Probably not. Who in your class should you use the phrase for? How do you identify who needs that cue, tuck the tail? You have to look at the arch in the low back. You have to also look at something else. There are plenty of people who have enough strength and tone to be in quite an extensive extension. So maybe what you need to identify is if their abdominal muscles are strong enough to maintain a safe arch. I'm going to put my hands here just so that I can show you what you definitely don't want to see. Or if the arch is actually more like an angle, and that's the only time we really want to change the position of the pelvis here. So when the tummy muscles are not strong enough to decelerate or control the arch in the lumbar spine, and it goes from being an arch to a kind of an angle. And that will put too much pressure on the low back. Should you use it in a general class? Probably not. What is it that you want to change? Because it's a direct command. What you want to change is an excessive lumbar lordosis coupled with muscle tone issues or injury issues. Finally, once you've identified whether that is happening or not, and you need to really take a look at whether there's an arch or an angle in the low back, you really need to take a look at the tone, the ability, the age of the person that you're going to give the direct command to. Finally, I would suggest that tuck your tail, even if you need to use it, might not be the best way to educate somebody about their lumbar position. Tuck the tail. Tuck the tail suggests, I'm going to put my hands back here just so that you can see it and I can stay here for longer without hurting my back. So tuck the tail suggests that you use the glutes and you push forwards and under. But remember, really, we've identified that it is the muscle tone of the abdominal wall that might be the culprit. So it might be a better phrase than tuck the tail. A better phrase might be use your abdominal muscles to draw your pubic bone up towards your breastbone, because that will encourage the student to engage the muscles that are lacking the engagement, and that will change the shape of the pelvis. Should you use it in a general class? No. How do you identify who needs the phrase or the action of changing the pelvis in chair pose? That excessive arch in the low back, not just an arch, an excessive arch. Finally, is tuck the tail the best way to educate that person out of that position? It might be better to get them to engage the part of them that is a little bit weaker in this. I would add in Warrior 2 that it's not tuck the tail. Once again, it is gently draw the pubic bone up towards the breastbone, and simultaneously I'd ask people to spiral their thigh bones out, because what you see a lot is that the thigh bones are rolling in and there is an excessive lumbar lordosis in Warrior 2. So we do two things simultaneously. Draw the pubic bone up towards the sternum. Simultaneously extend externally rotate the thighs, and that should put the low back into a better position in Warrior Two. I hope that helped.